I'm 76 years old, and I don't have many reasons left to lie about my life. Most of the people who mattered are gone, and the ones who remain already think they know the story. I'm telling this now because time has narrowed, because silence has started to feel heavier than truth, and because one afternoon many years ago at my daughter's graduation, everything I thought I understood about my marriage cracked open in public. I still see that day clearly. Not the whole thing at once, just pieces. The smell of cut grass on the campus lawn, the sound of folding chairs scraping concrete, my shoes hurting before the ceremony even began. I remember thinking it was strange how calm I felt. Big days usually made me nervous. But that morning I moved slowly, carefully, like my body already knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. My husband and I had been married for 32 years by then. That number sounds solid, like something that should mean safety. But numbers can lie when people stop paying attention to what's happening between them. We weren't cruel to each other. That's important to say. There was no shouting in our home, no broken plates, no dramatic threats. Just distance that grew so gradually it felt like aging. You don't notice it day to day. Only one morning you wake up and realize things don't work the way they used to. By the time our daughter was graduating, we spoke mostly in logistics. What time to leave? Where to park? Who would hold the program? We sat side by side but not together. That makes sense. I had raised our daughter believing that presence mattered, that showing up counted for something. I ironed her dress myself the night before. I remember smoothing the fabric and thinking how strange it was that her childhood fit into a rectangle of cloth. When we arrived, my husband walked ahead of me. Not far, just enough that I had to hurry to keep pace. I told myself it meant nothing. I was very good at telling myself that. The ceremony dragged the way all ceremonies do. Speeches that sounded borrowed. Applause that came late or early. Parents squinting at the stage, afraid to blink and miss the moment their child crossed it. When our daughter's name was called, I stood too fast. My knee buckled a little. I clapped harder than necessary, like volume could bridge the years between who she had been and who she was becoming. I looked for my husband then. I wanted to share that look, the one that says, "We did this." But he was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, hands folded. After the ceremony, families spilled into the courtyard. Cameras came out. People laughed louder than they meant to. That's when he told me. Not quietly, not privately, just standing there, with graduates brushing past us and strangers celebrating behind us. "I'm leaving after today," he said. First I thought he meant physically, that he was going to get the car, that he needed air. I asked him what he meant. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. "I'm done," he said. "I've been done for a while." There was no anger in his face, just relief, as if saying it out loud finally let him breathe. I remember nodding. That part always shocks people when I tell them, but nodding had been my reflex for decades. Nod, absorb, adjust. Nod, make room. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to reconsider. I didn't remind him of our history. Instead, I said something that changed everything. I said, "Then I think you should know something too." That's when he started screaming. Not raising his voice, not snapping, screaming. People turned. A woman nearby stopped mid-laugh. Someone's camera dipped. He shouted my name like it was an accusation, like a betrayal had just been discovered. I remember how strange it felt, standing there with my daughter somewhere in the crowd, watching her father unravel while I felt oddly calm. His face went red. His hand shook. He kept saying, "You planned this. You planned this." I hadn't. Not in the way he meant, but I had known. For years I had known something was ending. I just hadn't named it. The truth I told him wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confession meant to wound. It was simply something I had never said out loud before. Something I had carried quietly, the way women of my generation were taught to. When the words left my mouth, they didn't feel sharp. They felt overdue, and he couldn't bear that. What people don't understand is that his anger wasn't about leaving. It was about losing control of the story. He wanted to be the one who ended things, the one with the clarity, the one with the final word. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a celebration, realizing he wasn't the only one who had been living a separate life inside the same marriage. Security didn't intervene. No one asked if I was all right. People just drifted away, uncomfortable with pain they hadn't paid for tickets to see. Eventually, he stormed off. I don't remember where he went. I remember sitting on a low stone wall, my legs suddenly weak. I remember thinking how odd it was that after 32 years, our ending didn't sound like anything I had imagined. Our daughter found me later. She asked where her father was. I told her he'd gone ahead. That was true enough. I didn't tell her the rest. Some truths wait. I didn't know then how much that moment would echo, how often I would replay it in quiet rooms, how the screaming would become less important than what I had finally admitted, to him and to myself. This isn't the story of a man leaving. That part is easy. This is the story of everything that led us there, the years that seemed harmless while they were happening. If you want, I can tell you how we got there. I didn't leave the graduation right away. I stayed until our daughter found me again, until the photos were taken, until the day finished pretending it was normal. That's something I learned early in life, how to stay, how to finish what was expected of me, even when something inside had already ended. After that day, people assumed the marriage fell apart suddenly. They always do. It makes the story easier to digest. But nothing sudden had happened. The truth is, our marriage had been thinning for years, the way fabric does when it's washed too often and cared for too little. I met my husband when I was 23. I was working at a small insurance office then. Nothing impressive. Just a desk, a phone, and the habit of being dependable. He liked that about me. He said it made him feel steady. He was ambitious in a quiet way. Not loud about it. Just always moving toward the next thing. Better position, better house, better future. When he asked me to marry him, it felt like a sensible decision. We liked each other. We respected each other. We wanted similar things, or so we thought. Love back then wasn't something we dissected. It was something you built around. The early years were busy. That's how I remember them. Busy but full. We worked to save. We learned each other's habits. He liked his shirts folded a certain way. I liked quiet in the mornings. When our daughter was born, I became very good at disappearing into responsibility. I told myself it was temporary, that there would be time later, for myself, for us. There's always time later, until there isn't. He threw himself into work. I didn't question it. Providing was love in our world. I adjusted my life around his schedule. I learned to eat dinner alone without feeling lonely. I learned to save stories for later, even when later never came. When he missed things, school plays, doctor appointments, small celebrations, I filled the space. I told our daughter, "Your father's proud of you," even when he wasn't there to say it himself. I believed that holding things together was my role. I didn't resent it at first. Felt useful. Over time, usefulness replaced intimacy. We stopped asking each other real questions. How was your day? Became a formality, not a doorway. Sometimes late at night, I would lie awake and listen to him breathe. I wondered if he felt as alone as I did, or if he was simply elsewhere, already halfway gone. I didn't confront him, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't know what I would ask for. I had been raised to believe that wanting more was ungrateful, that dissatisfaction was a personal failure. So I quieted myself. I became efficient at not needing. Years passed that way. Not bad years, just muted ones. We aged into routines. Sunday mornings, holiday obligations, conversations about repairs and finances. From the outside we looked stable. People said we were solid. They didn't see the way silence stretched between us at dinner. They didn't notice how we stopped touching except by accident. I remember one evening in my early 40s. Our daughter was already grown enough to stay out late. The house was quiet. I tried to talk to him about us. Not dramatically, just gently. He listened politely. Then he said, "You worried too much. This is just how marriage is." I believed him, 'cause I wanted to. That was one of the many small moments that cost us everything. Not because it was cruel, but because it taught me to doubt my own voice. I started writing things down then. Not secrets, just thoughts. Little realizations about how much of myself I had packed away to keep the peace. I never intended to leave. That's important. I just began to exist quietly alongside my life instead of inside it. By the time my daughter was preparing to graduate, the marriage felt like a shared address, not a shared experience. I think my husband sensed the shift. He became restless, short-tempered in subtle ways. We never fought, but we also never reached each other. What I told him at the graduation wasn't about another person. People always assume that. It was about the part of me that had already stepped away long before he announced he was leaving. And when he realized that, something in him broke open, not because I had betrayed him, but because I had stopped belonging to the version of the marriage he thought he controlled. That realization terrified him. It took me years to understand that his screaming wasn't anger. It was grief colliding with surprise. After he left, the house didn't feel emptier right away. That surprised me. Felt quieter, yes, but it had already been quiet for so long that the silence didn't shock me the way people expected to. What changed first was time. Suddenly, time stretched. Evenings had no shape. Weekends arrived without purpose. I remember standing in the kitchen a few nights after the graduation, staring at 2 mugs on the counter. I had made tea out of habit. I poured one down the sink without thinking. That's when it hit me, not like grief, but like awareness. How much of my life had been built on habits instead of choices. My husband moved out quickly. He said it was better that way. Clean, efficient. We divided things the way people do when they're trying not to feel. Furniture, counts, old photo albums neither of us wanted to open. Our daughter took it harder than either of us expected. She didn't cry much. She became careful instead. Careful with her words. Careful with her questions. One evening she asked me, "Did you know this was coming?" I told her the truth. Yes, but not the day. She nodded like that explained something she had already been carrying. That's when I realized how many things children sense long before they're told. Living alone in my 50s felt strange. Not frightening, just unfamiliar. I had been a wife longer than I had been anything else. Even motherhood came later. I didn't rush to fill the space. No dramatic reinvention. No decorations. I went to work. Cooked simple meals. I slept diagonally across the bed without meaning to. People asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. And mostly I was. But there was a thin sadness underneath everything. Not about him. About me. About how long I had postponed myself waiting for permission that was never coming. The turning point didn't arrive with a bang. It came quietly like everything else in my life. I was 62 when I got sick. Not terminal. Not immediately dangerous. Just serious enough to make doctors speak more slowly. I remember sitting in the examination room, paper gown sticking to my skin, thinking, so this is how it happens. Not all at once. Just enough to make you pay attention. During recovery I had time. Real time. The kind you can't ignore. I reread old notebooks. The ones where I had written my thoughts all those years ago. Page after page of restraint. Of patience mistaken for virtue. I wasn't angry when I read them. I was tender. Toward the woman I had been. Toward how hard she tried to be good. That's when clarity arrived. Not dramatically, but firmly. I understood that the real loss wasn't the marriage. It was the years I spent shrinking myself to keep it intact. That realization was heavy. Heavier than the divorce papers. Heavier than his absence. Some things become clear only when your body reminds you that time is not generous. My ex-husband reached out during that period. Brief messages. Concerned but distant. He told me he hadn't expected things to feel the way they did. That leaving hadn't brought the freedom he imagined. Listen, I didn't correct him. I didn't offer comfort. Not out of bitterness, out of honesty. There are moments when the door doesn't slam. It simply closes, and you notice too late that you're on opposite sides. He never apologized for the screaming, and I never asked him to. That moment no longer mattered as much as what followed. The quiet accounting of a life. As my health stabilized, something else became unavoidable. The sense that time, whatever remained of it, deserved more presence than my earlier years had received. Not busyness, presence. I started noticing things. Light on the floor in the afternoon, the sound of my own footsteps. I reconnected with old friends. Not to complain, just to listen. We spoke about aging parents, about children making their own lives. Loss surfaced in conversations the way weather does. I realized how many of us were carrying similar regrets, just shaped differently. What couldn't be fixed became clearer too. I couldn't go back and speak sooner. I couldn't give my daughter a model of love that included mutual curiosity and tenderness. I couldn't reclaim the years when I believed endurance was the same as devotion. Those things were gone, not stolen, just spent. That understanding sat with me for a long time. No drama, no resolution montage, just acceptance mixed with grief. Now, at this age, I understand why my husband screamed that day. Because I spoke from a place he didn't know existed. Because my truth meant his version of the past wasn't complete. That's a hard thing to face in public. In the final part, I want to speak directly to you. Not to instruct, not to warn, but to share what living this long has taught me about time, silence, and the cost of waiting. At this age, mornings arrive quietly. Not gently, just without announcement. I wake up before the sun most days. Not because I have somewhere to be, but because my body no longer believes in sleeping late. I sit at the edge of the bed and listen to the house. There are sounds you only notice when you've lived alone long enough. Pipes settling, wood cooling, your own breath. This is where the story ends, not because it's finished, but because there isn't much road left to walk. When people ask if I regret my marriage, I never know how to answer. Regret feels too simple, too clean. I loved my husband in the way I knew how at the time. I honored the promises I understood. I stayed when staying was praised and leaving was unthinkable. But I also disappeared in small daily ways that no one noticed. Not even me. That's the part one carry. What can't be fixed now isn't the marriage. It's the years I spent believing silence was maturity. That endurance meant depth. That being agreeable was the same as being loved. You don't get those years back. They don't return as wisdom or closure. They just become memory. I see my daughter sometimes. She's kind to me, attentive. But there's a distance that wasn't there before. Not blame, awareness. She once told me quietly, "I didn't know you wanted more." I didn't either. Not clearly. Not soon enough. That's what time does. Clarifies, but it doesn't negotiate. If I'm speaking to you now, it isn't to tell you what to do. I don't believe in that anymore. It's just this. Pay attention to what you keep postponing. Not the big dreams, the small truths. The conversations you rehearse but never start. The feelings you label as temporary because they're inconvenient. The parts of yourself you promise to come back to later. Later is fragile. My husband and I never spoke again about that day at the graduation. Not really. He remarried. I heard it through mutual friends. I hope he found what he was looking for. Truly do. As for me, I found something quieter. Not happiness in the loud sense, but honesty. I live smaller now. More carefully. I say things when they arrive, not years later. There isn't much time left, and I don't need it to be full. I just need it to be real. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred a thought you've been avoiding, sit with it. You don't have to act. Just notice. And if you're willing, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else may be listening the way you were. For stories like this, told slowly and truthfully. You can subscribe to The Gentle Truths. These are the kinds of things we don't say out loud until time makes us brave. I'm not afraid of the ending anymore. Only of what goes unsaid before it arrives.